Kansas City on the verge of something super, and it's going to impact you whether you watch or not. Tracking our Metro's most impactful stories and newsmakers. It's your Local Week Reviewed. Next.
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome everyone, I'm Nick Haynes. You can feel it in the air. Anger over potholes. Oh yes, and excitement over the Chiefs. We have the highs and lows of the week pouring through our Metro's top headlines. Mr. Up-to-Date on KCUR-FM, Steve Kraske. From the Call newspaper, senior writer Eric Wesson. From 41 Action News, Kat Reed. And from the pages of your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling. Is the Super Bowl the only local news story people are talking about this week? It's going to affect you whether you watch or not. A number of downtown streets are closing Sunday as they expect up to 20,000 people for a mammoth tailgate party in the Power and Light District. Get your milk, bread and tea bags now. Did you see that more than a dozen Price Chopper stores are shutting their doors at 4:30 actually on Sunday afternoon, and many other businesses are following their lead, sometimes closing earlier to allow staff to prepare for the big game. Outside of a winter storm, has there been this much disruption for a sports game before, Steve?
I can't remember anything quite like this in my time here in Kansas City, Nick. This is big. This is super. It's a once in a 50-year event.
Yeah, it's exciting as all get out. It's different from the World Series years because those teams were exciting and the community was involved, but over several weeks there were different games, playoff games. The World Series itself, this is one shot for all the marbles. I think people are excited. By the way, you mentioned all the things that are happening in the community. I was here, as I think I said, for Super Bowl I. One of the big stories was how the water pressure drops during commercial breaks because everybody goes to the bathroom. And so you can look for that also to be a story that pops
He's
up
always got potty humor on this program, ladies and gentlemen. I want to bring in Kat Reed for a moment because last week we dissected the planning for the Super Bowl parade, potentially, with Michael Mahoney, and he revealed it would take place on Wednesday. With a backup date now we're hearing of Thursday. If the weather turns ugly, the parade would follow a similar path to the one that the Royals took in 2015 from Sprint Center down Grand and onto Union Station. Is there anything else our viewers need to know?
So a lot of details are still being kept close to the vest.
Still, all right.
But I will say people need to be prepared for businesses shutting down for the parade, for it being extraordinarily difficult to get around. And the people working on the preparations do expect that there will be even more people than were there for the World Series parade. So if you were there for that, brace yourself for that and more.
And clearly, Eric, they certainly completely dismissed your suggestion of having the parade go from the original municipal stadium and then down to Union Station.
And I don't know why they would ignore it like that, because that's where it started. But it's not only going to be for the parade. I think it's going to be a lot of businesses closed Monday and Tuesday if they win.
Yeah.
Because
well, I even saw KU
celebrating.
students now demanding and starting a petition to close the university on Monday.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of classes shutting down at UMKC where I work as well. I had an official from the Sports Commission on the show this week who made a very interesting point to what Kat said, and that is simply this, that compared to the Royals, she feels like there's a lot more fan loyalty to the Chiefs. It extends in a broader region than maybe the Royals does. The base goes out into Nebraska and other states around Missouri as well. And she said the same thing that Kat just did, which is if you thought the Royals parade was a big deal, look out for what this Chiefs thing might be.
Now, when the Philadelphia Eagles lifted the Super Bowl trophy in 2018, there was mayhem on the streets. Video and photos at the time show looting, cars overturned, streetlights toppled, fires set, extensive property damage. The Philly police scanner even included reports of police horses being punched, bottles thrown, assaults, and even an unconfirmed rumor that an ostrich had been stolen from the local zoo. But what are Kansas City police doing to prepare, especially after the Chiefs' last game, Eric, in which we even had a deadly mass shooting hours after that championship game?
Absolutely, and those things that you listed are just everyday things here in Kansas City. But I think they got 100 additional police officers from the region that are going to be coming in. It'll be pretty tight security, and it'll be police everywhere. So I think they've got some aspects, but if the crowds are 10 times larger than the St. Patrick's Day parade, they're going to have their hands full.
Ken.
We'll have patrol officers, extra traffic officers targeting drunk drivers, and then also tactical squads. That's what KCPD says. And then we've also seen a lot of local departments posting on social media already about celebratory gunfire, which is a huge concern because what goes up must come down. And for some reason, that tradition continues here.
Now, if the Chiefs do win, in addition to the parade, will there be a trip to the White House? The owner of the San Francisco 49ers already weighing in on that, declaring, I hope that we're fortunate enough to get a call from the president to invite us there. Why have we not heard anything from Clark Hunt or anyone from the Chiefs about that?
Well, they'll get an invitation. All Super Bowl winners do. Maybe they just don't want to jinx it. It won't be controversial, I don't think. There may be some players who choose not to go. That's happened in other White House visits. It could be the same with the Chiefs as well. But I do think there's some belief at the football team's headquarters that let's not get too far ahead of ourselves on all of this stuff. Let's go out and win the game. And by the way, let me also suggest that I do get the sense that authorities are in some ways more worried if the Chiefs lose because Sunday is a long day, and there will be ample opportunity for drinking before the game even starts. Then the game starts. If you lose at that point, people with less self-control might come forward. That's a concern.
By the way, a quick trivia question for you at home and our panelists. Who was the first president to invite the Super Bowl winning team to the White House?
I'd guess Richard Nixon.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
He was a huge football fan. He used to draw up plans for the Washington team.
And he's the one who called Glenn Dawson after the Chiefs won their first Super Bowl.
Yeah.
But he's not the one. In fact, the answer is President Jimmy Carter. That was in 1980 when he invited the Pittsburgh Steelers to the White House in a joint ceremony with the Pittsburgh Pirates, who had just won the World Series.
We should have known that, David.
Yeah, we should have.
Absolutely.
Failed again.
Well, believe it or not, there are a lot of other stories making the news this week, and chances are good one of them has already jolted you personally. Yes, they're back with a vengeance. Potholes, a petition drive gaining steam in Waldo from residents irate about the conditions of their streets. Why so bad when you may remember it was one of the defining issues of the mayoral election campaign last year?
My question for both of y'all is the potholes.
All of you have already increased taxes to actually pay for these. And in that tax increase, we said we were going to fix existing infrastructure. I'm going to be someone who makes sure we hold on to our promise, addressing existing infrastructure and making sure we don't have these issues.
Okay, first of all, before we look at the response of the city to this, are they really any worse than this time last year, or have we got short attention spans, Kat?
Okay, so I have some data for you, Nick. I guess last year, at this time, we had 678 reports of potholes to 311. This year, we're at 610. So we're 68 potholes behind. So it's still a massive problem.
We'll catch up.
We will catch up. And some people have spoken about there being maybe an earlier onset of the pothole mania
like a
this
disease.
year. Yeah, it's early onset.
Well, we just heard from the mayor. That was him when he was still candidate, Lucas. How about as mayor, Lucas, and how has he responded to this in any way differently than his predecessor, Slide James?
And in addition to the slide that you showed, remember when he was running, his campaign tag was at the end of his commercials, and fix the potholes. I disagree. Well, they can make a statistic say whatever they wanted to say, but by far there are more potholes this year than they were last year, and they're more pronounced. And I don't even think they fixed all of last year's potholes. If you go down between 55th and Swope Parkway and 55th and Paseo, it is a disaster.
But aren't the issues like this though out of the control of a mayor when we're dealing with the weather, Steve?
But
largely so. We've had this freeze-thaw cycle in this community any number of weeks now, Nick, and we have a very large community, and that means that promises like the one that Quinton Lucas made during the campaign are really hard to keep up with and fulfill because there are just so many, and we are so large, and our crews are as big as they are, and there's no magic solution here.
And I just wanted to point out, speaking of the crews, that the folks who do all of our snow removal and plowing, those are the same people who fill the potholes.
Right.
So when you have snow events, then there's a delay in the potholes. But I get it. I mean, I had a flat tire in a pothole last year, so I get the frustration.
I've replaced tire after tire and rim. If you just had one, you did good. But here's the issue that we have. It's the filling the potholes rather than resurfacing the street. It seems like outside of the urban core, they resurface the whole street. They're allegedly going to take $8 million from the pothole budget and put it in for the free bus rides. So people are starting to get wind of that, and they're saying, well, I guess when your car's in the shop, you'll be able to ride the bus for free. But they've got to figure out a way to do that.
In a broader sense, though, we talked about last week, Dave Helling, the fire tax that they're now adding to the ballot in Kansas City, Missouri in April that would increase the sales tax to help fund ambulance and fire service in Kansas City. How does this position, though, on potholes and people's feelings about that, on where the money is going, impact that vote?
Well, it could. I mean, people might be angry enough at City Hall over potholes and snow removal to be against adding another $300 million to the fire department's budget. But it also, Nick, and this may come up later in the show, but it also continues to erode the mayor's credibility, and that will be crucial in April as well. You just saw a clip or showed a clip from him in your debate. His commitment to filling potholes was unequivocal, and we did not hear him say, but it's hard or it's a big city. He said, we're going to do it. He said we've got too many taxes, and yet not only was he absent, as we pointed out last week for the fire vote, but he did sign the ordinance on Monday, which is required under city charter. So I do think people are starting to think, well, now wait a minute, are the things that Quinton Lucas said in the campaign inoperable? Now that he's mayor, and if that's the case, how can we hand them a check for $300 million?
By the way, in that column last week, you wrote in the editorial that this was the height of mendacity and secretiveness on that vote, on the mayor not being here for that vote. Did you hear anything back from the mayor on that?
I did not. Certainly no phone call or email or request for a correction. We did say, you know, the people of Kansas City can reach their own conclusions about the timing of that vote. It is a fact that he could have asked for a delay. He did not. It is a fact that he was out of town. And it is a fact that that tax could have been considered over a 4.5-month range from the time it became effective to the time the council brought it up. Again, I think it's a problem for the mayor if people continually see clips like that and then drive over potholes.
Could not agree more.
They're going to, you know, when his credibility goes, it's going to be tough.
Let's talk about another thing, campaign promise. On the campaign trail last year, candidate Quinton Lucas said Kansas City needs a new downtown ballpark like he needs a new Maserati. Now, is that position changing? Did you see those images released this week from a local architecture firm on what a new ballpark would look like when our entire metro is singularly focused on the Chiefs? First of all, why is this ballpark issue even coming up now, Kat?
Well, I feel like we have been talking about this downtown ballpark a lot too, especially, you know, just talking about the Royals, the ownership, excuse me, and already Mayor Lucas, when he talked about it, seemed to have softened in his position.
Oh, so he has.
I need this like a new Maserati. I'm going to point out one thing about the design. Some people pointed out that you might have to watch out for your cars in that parking garage if the balls leave the stadium.
I don't know why it's still a topic of discussion, and it continues to come up, and I don't know what they're going to do about trying to defuse it, but I agree. We don't need a downtown ballpark at this time.
There will be lots of time to get into the merits of this, but the politics are fascinating. You can talk to some people in Kansas City who say the deal has already been struck. They're just looking for a place. Developers are circling, looking for how they can make money off the deal in nearby properties and real estate. But you can talk to other people saying, no, it's not really, John Sherman's not that interested, the new owner of the Royals, it's too expensive, and what do you do about the Chiefs?
Right.
Well, how do we put this on the ballot? So, but, again, Mayor Quinton Lucas was unequivocal in the campaign in his opposition to this idea. He appears to be sliding away from that, and that is a problem.
He said on my show, Nick, that he never said he didn't want the new Maserati.
Of course.
So it wouldn't be a bad thing. You know, it's going to be talked about. It should be talked about. It's a big policy decision this community has to face because the trend around the country, and it's a trend for a reason, building baseball parks downtown, people like it. They help revitalize downtowns. That's controversial in its own way. But there's reasons to be having this conversation. It's time to have the conversation now because the land has to be bought and decisions have to be made.
But what about all the tax dollars that were spent and still being spent? People are paying for renovation of the Royals and the Chiefs Stadium. Do you just disregard that money that taxpayers are on the hook for until what, 20 years from now?
And while my colleague Steve is right about having this conversation about baseball now, football cannot be ignored. And particularly if the Chiefs win the Super Bowl or even continue their run of excellence, people are going to say, what are you going to do for that team too? How do we pay for it? Do they stay where they're at, or do they go to Kansas, or there are other mechanisms? So all of these things are sort of circling together, and the moment is at hand.
Some people will say that why are we vexing over issues in the future that are going to spend our money when we have pressing issues right now? One of the most prominent local stories of last year was the mess over property assessments in Jackson County. Now alarm bells being rung on the Kansas side of the state line with sharp increases in property valuations. Kansas lawmakers are pushing a bill that would force cities and counties to put any property tax increase to a public vote. Its supporters say it's about transparency. What impact would it have on cities and counties looking for that extra cash?
Well, they would have to, if they wanted to change the valuation, they'd have to then lower their mill levy so that the total tax dollars wouldn't go up unless they took it to a public vote. So it would involve a lot more maneuvering on that aspect. And then also, some people fear that then you just see an increase in a sales tax or an income tax, some other mechanism to raise the money.
Yeah, it's a modified Hancock Amendment. As you know, in Missouri, your taxes can go up roughly or your levies or your revenue roughly the rate of inflation. But if you want any additional revenue, you have to have a vote, which is why we're going to vote in April on a sales tax for the fire department. That kind of approach would then come to Kansas. Kansas governments would be pretty frustrated, I think, under a Hancock-like approach because there are so many municipalities and because they have become accustomed over the years, Nick, to getting more money because the value of the properties continue to rise in Johnson County. And therefore you can say, hey, I didn't raise the mill levy. We're just getting more money because values are going up.
Listen, the sticker shock in Kansas right now over property tax bills, like they have been in Jackson County, has been pretty profound. My own property tax bill took a pretty mighty spike this year. I want to point out that over the last decade, property tax collections in Kansas have risen by $1 billion. And Nick, this is the Sam Brownback bill, if you will. When you cut school funding as he did, when you cut services to cities and communities as he did, those folks had to account for that loss, and they raised property taxes to compensate for it. Sam Brownback simply passed the ball down the line, and now Kansans are paying that bill.
What happened with the Jackson County property tax mess? Because we were told that it was going to cause all of these horror stories, all of these increases in valuations. People wouldn't be able to afford to live in those homes. They'll be selling them. I mean, did any of that happen, Eric?
There's some bills in the State House to do something to help people with those tax bills, but basically right now everything seems to be still in limbo. People are paying their taxes, but they're paying them under protest, and they're writing that on their checks, so that money has to sit in a separate escrow account until it's settled, and people have taken them to court for it.
Yeah,
so
there have been lawsuits filed.
Yeah.
Lawsuits filed. The other thing, though, Nick, is the Board of Equalization has, based on just anecdotal evidence, basically rolled back levies for anyone who has filed a protest. If you go in and say, hey, look, my evaluation was too high, and you ask the BOE for an adjustment, they're rolling it back for virtually everybody. That takes some of the steam out of it. And then some people just, realize, hey, the value of my property has gone up, and I do have to account for that. That's how property taxes work. All of that has combined to take a little bit of the steam out of the anti-tax movement.
If it affects you, then you're going to get incensed by it. Still on the topic of taxes, we recently told you about plans by Governor Laura Kelly in Kansas to start taxing your Netflix subscription and other streaming services like Spotify. Apparently, though, this week we learned that Republican leaders claim the tax is, quote, dead on arrival. Now, this would bring in about $29 million a year. 33 states already have a tax like this on the books. Yet it's sort of a hidden fee, in a sense, the tax is on something like this. Why would they be so reluctant to go in this move on this when they really need money in the state of Kansas?
Because politicians, Nick, are extraordinarily sensitive about raising taxes when
Okay.
it's an election year.
All right.
And this is a big one in Kansas. So when something's as popular as your Netflix account, they're going to run from that pretty
So I
quickly.
can continue binge watching without taxes in Kansas then, Kat?
It appears so. It would be a way for the Republicans to go take a look at Laura Kelly and say, you said no higher taxes, rather.
15 seconds. Kansas is in a pickle. The property tax thing that Steve just talked about is really distorted. The sales tax on food remains a huge issue, and there are some suggestions of how to deal with that. The income tax rates are lowered. Kansas needs money. They've got to figure it out. It's not going to be easy to do.
And they have to figure it out because they're digging out from the Sam Brownback years. And this is what Governor Kelly has been saying. She was elected on that platform, and to a large degree, she's right about that.
One of Kansas City's most prominent African-American leaders has died.
And so I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free.
Wallace Hartsfield was the longtime minister at the Metropolitan Missionary Baptist Church, but his role was just as big away from the pulpit. He was 90 years old. What was his biggest impact in Kansas City, Eric?
Civil rights and being able to preach and sing at the same time. But his focus was always on civil rights for the little person with no voice. Very respected. Gonna miss him, gonna miss his leadership and his being able to bring the community together and get them focused on one thing.
Yeah, but his moral authority was unquestioned in Kansas City for a time. And although he never held elective office, he was able to gather community interests together and present a unified force in political matters. And really, he's the last of a breed in that way. You know, the whole idea of the ministers working together for the East Side community is under enormous pressure. Wallace Hartsfield was perhaps the best I have ever seen at sort of getting the differences apart and to bring people together.
Does this represent then a signal change then in Kansas City in terms of the power of African-American leaders? And we certainly saw that with the Martin Luther King vote, where the black ministers came together. They wanted to maintain that as Martin Luther King Boulevard, and voters said no and rejected it overwhelmingly.
I think it is a moment in that way, Nick, because certainly Wallace Hartsfield represented a time when those black ministers had unquestioned authority in this community and moral authority and could really pull that community together. And you're so right. In the wake of the Paseo vote, that may have changed.
It wasn't not only the moral authority, but City Hall feared them. At that time, during the Earl Abel, the A.L. Johnson, and the Hartsfield era, people that went to their churches lived in the community. So they had that base and that support in the community. Now when you go to these churches, their people live out in Lee Summit, Blue Springs, and it's kind of weakened their base.
With a Senate impeachment trial dominating the national news conversation, some of our viewers have expressed surprise we haven't said one word about it on this program. Well, Jim in Mission is among them. I think the big story you missed last week was the impeachment trial. Well, with thousands of reporters covering Washington and so few covering the news right here in our own backyard, I jealously guard the time we have to tackle those local issues on this program. But certainly this week, there were some interesting local tie-ins to the impeachment trial. Kansas Senator Pat Roberts notably claimed he would prefer to be home watching Chicago PD than listening to the impeachment testimony. Missouri Senator Josh Hawley getting a lot of national attention for being one of the president's biggest offenders on the Senate floor.
They don't like the president. They've never liked the president. They wanted to impeach him from day one. They were hell-bent on doing it. And now, oops, they accidentally did it, and they can't prove a case because there isn't a case. And they're putting the whole country through this, Tucker. And that's why it's time to bring this to an end.
Was our own senator from Missouri one of the most prominent speakers on national television on this issue this week?
He is, Nick, and there's a fascinating history with Senator Hawley when it comes to Donald Trump. He began his campaign for the U.S. Senate a little critical of Donald Trump, but that quickly changed when party leaders got a hold of him and said, you've got to get right with the president. I want to point out that just days before his election, Nick, a Fox News poll showed that he and Claire McCaskill were deadlocked at 43% each. He wound up winning by 6 points, but that was only after Donald Trump, as president of this country, came to Missouri no fewer than 7 times to campaign for Josh Hawley. Josh Hawley owes Donald Trump big time, and that's what you're seeing play out in Washington.
What about in Kansas, though? You had Pat Roberts, who is not having to run for re-election again. Some people viewing him as being a bit more independent at this point, but he also has had no time for the Democrats on this impeachment case.
Pat Roberts has always been a partisan, more partisan, by the way, in the last 20 years maybe, and then earlier in his career when he was a bit more independent. I will say in the Josh Hawley case, not only does he owe Donald Trump, but he is looking at 2024, as we've discussed on this program, and he needs to get right with that wing of the party. And I would say that if I'm ever on trial in a criminal sense, I want Josh Hawley on my jury, because apparently evidence doesn't mean anything to him, and we can just go ahead and dismiss the case.
When you put a program like this together every week, you can't get to every big headline. What was the big story that we missed? Here comes the sun. We may not be Miami, but it's about to feel like it.
65 degrees. Oh my.
State health officials in Kansas reporting a potential coronavirus case. They didn't get the pay raise and better working conditions they wanted. Now teachers threatening a mass exodus from the Shawnee Mission School District. UMKC in the headlines as it ditches ACT and SAT scores to gain admission. And remembering Charles Ferruza, the longtime columnist and restaurant critic, has died. He was 62. Was it one of those stories or something completely different, Kent?
I am going to stay on the healthcare beat, and I will say we hear a lot about coronavirus, but there's something else you may have heard of that's killed more people, is infecting more people. It's the flu, and we've had 8,000 people this flu season in the U.S. die, according to the CDC, including 3 here locally. So we cannot forget about that as a major threat.
Eric.
16 homicides in 31 days. That's almost every other day there's a homicide here. And I want to also say human trafficking transfer points are in Kansas City and Independence. These vans driving around with no license plates on them, trafficking people. I think that's something we need
The
to
issue
talk
about the homicides, though, is do we talk about it every single week and say there's nothing really happening to change it?
You could say that, or bring awareness to what could we be doing to change that.
We're ahead of last year's pace on homicides, by the way.
Ahead.
I want to point to my former colleague at KCUR, Charles Ferruza, Nick. So insightful when it came to food. He was an everyman's kind of food critic, a singular voice on the air. He's going to be missed.
Dave.
There is a battle going on that's on the business pages for now involving Evergy, the local energy company, the powers your lights, and an activist hedge fund called Elliott Management. Soon that will be on your front pages because lots at stake, millions of dollars, and what you pay to turn on the lights will be an issue as well.
And that is our championship-winning Kansas City Week in Review. From all of us here at KCPT, thanks for spending part of your Super Bowl winning weekend with us.